we're gonna try to do some PowerPoint. We're going to go through some of the arguments for the existence of God. I know, beyond a shadow of doubt, some of this is a review for you. But understand the reason why we're doing this, number one, is to make you familiar with it. Number two, so that hopefully you can teach somebody at some point in the future. So, bear with me. If you have questions along the way, feel free to holler, stop. If you've got, things that you want to throw in here, I will make my PowerPoints available to you guys. One of the things that I did with the first year students, I have an iDisk where I post stuff up, and I will give you guys that address. So if you'll bear with me. The other thing, I think I've got everybody's email address, but I would love for you all to send me an email, even if it's blank, just to make sure I have your email. That way I can kind of keep up with you better. Let's see how this thing is going to work. Give me just a second to kind of bring it up. All right, so as I mentioned, we established first the fact, yes, there's matter. Now, I may need you guys to talk to kick the thing back to you, because right now I'm just seeing the pause thing. Keep talking.
Keep talking, Doc.
All right. Hey, James.
There we go. All right.
You can do better than that.
You're a rock kid. Come on.
Sorry.
All right, let's see what we got here.
Why is it that every time something goes wrong, I get blamed?
You blame for talking too much, not for talking.
Exactly.
It's not that it's going wrong, it just wasn't going right. First of all, Dean.
Okay.
I understand it now.
Well, and you destroy.
Hopefully you guys are seeing my computer.
We're seeing your desktop now, Brad.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second.
Oh, wow.
No, we're supposed to hear that.
Stop the tape.
I missed something.
Go ahead, Paul.
One time was too many.
Dee, would you like to share?
Oh, am I allowed to share, Paul? Sure. Oh, you had that picture of the iguana up there. And,
Yeah.
Paul said, I didn't know he had a picture of my mother-in-law up there.
Sorry.
Hey, as long as you don't talk about my wife, that's cool. That's, you can get away with a lot in this class, as long as you don't mess with my wife. I am fast forwarding, as you can see. Okay. So this is a lesson I do, basically saying, look, we got problems in the U.S. because we've abandoned God.
Yeah.
So once I've kind of laid down that, let's see. This is nice. Hey, Wayne?
Yes, sir.
Just as a FYI, I can actually see you guys.
Good.
So at the bottom corner, picture in picture. Okay, I took this picture a couple of weeks ago. Notice what the Barnes & Noble sign says.
Thought-provoking.
Okay, look at every title on there.
God's not great.
It's hard to see some of them.
God Delusion, The Portable Atheist, Living Without God, Why Evolution is True, Breaking the Spell, The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins, The Atheist Way, Bertrand Russell, Why I Became an Atheist, over and over. Every single one of those books is doing what? All promoting atheism. Now, guys, that's in the Bible Belt. If they're doing that in the Bible Belt, think about what's, why do you think they put thought-provoking?
Draw people.
And primarily what age?
Yeah, there's younger people.
Teenagers.
Eric, that's right up your alley, brother. Right up your alley. Seriously. You're what, 23?
22.
There you go. That particular end cap is targeting 17 to 25-year-olds. And you can imagine how it plays out when somebody sees those kind of books. So, here's what we do. We set up the argument. Look, the world is attacking the very idea of whether or not there's a God. We talked a little bit about the fact that we can use the scientific method to prove some things, but God is a spirit. Those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. So, we look at arguments. We're going to look at three. Basically, we'll touch on them, and we'll get into a little bit more depth on some of this stuff. My favorite, by far, is the first one, the cosmological argument. And we've already kind of, in a way, we've hinted on it. But the idea is, okay, if we are going to prove there's a God, we walk somebody outside and we point up to the night sky and we point to all that stuff and we say, where did that come from? Because let's say that, James, let's say that your children look at you and say, Daddy, you preach all this stuff about God, but how do you know he's real? You walk out, you point up to the night sky, and you simply say, where did all that come from? The point being, you are forcing them to discover for themselves the truth. There are only three options of where everything came from. Option number one is the universe or matter is eternal, meaning it's always existed. Now, that right there, right off the bat, ought to cause you some question marks in your mind. Is matter eternal? Like, is your concrete driveway going to be there forever and ever and ever?
No.
What's going to happen to it?
It's going to break down.
If you never reseal it, it's going to be weeds within about 60, 70 years. Option number two is the universe is not eternal, but rather it created itself from nothing. Option number three, the universe is not eternal, it didn't create itself, but rather it was created by something or someone anterior and superior to itself. Can anybody in that room think of an option outside of those three? Here's the thing. Even if you were to throw something out, more than likely, it would come back and fit into one of those three. Those realistically are your only three options of explaining where everything came from. Number one, it's been here forever. Number two, it popped into existence from nothing, or it was created. What's the problem with number one?
We can see that it's breaking down.
Okay? And just from a scientific perspective, what's the universe doing right now?
Expanding.
It's expanding outward. We know, beyond the shadow of a doubt, the universe, the picture I chose right there is a spiral galaxy. And the reason I chose that picture is because we know spiral galaxies are actually radiating out. So if you've got a galaxy, if you've got measurements that are showing you, hey, things are moving, that means it can't be eternal. It had to have a beginning. And the two guys, I would mention their names just so you can kind of keep them, maybe put them in your notes as folks to refer back to. Two guys who proved this beyond the shadow of a doubt. Albert Einstein and a guy named Edwin Hubble of Hubble telescope fame. Einstein came up with what has been called his biggest failure, and that was the cosmological constant. He basically put in a fudge factor to explain some of the expansion of the universe. Because Einstein was smart enough to realize if the universe is expanding, that means it had to have a beginning, and he realized there were actually theological implications for that. Edwin Hubble actually notified Einstein and said, hey, come out to California, look through my observatory, through this telescope, because I'm seeing that prediction that you had talked about, and that he ended up showing him what we call red shift. It's basically the shadow that you see when a star moves. So Hubble's looking at red shift. Einstein steps up to the telescope. He looks at it. He leaves the observatory with his hands in his head, basically saying something to the effect of, I've always expected it, but I did not want this to be true. So option number one is no good. And when I present this lesson, I always give a quote from the other side, because who better to dog something than an atheist or an evolutionist? Well, let them make your point for you. So Robert Jastrow says, modern science denies an eternal existence to the universe either in the past or the future. Now, I'm going to back up. Look at our list. We just killed the first one. How many options does an atheist have left?
2.
One.
Nope.
Yeah, just one. You're right.
Just one. The second one.
Just number 2. Because what does the third one imply?
Creator.
That there's something out there. So if you're an atheist, we just said option number 1 is unscientific. Option number 3 you don't like. That means you are stuck with option number 2. So, how logical is that one? I mean, think about it. In all seriousness, how logical is it to say something came from nothing, and yet this, guys, is where you've got them literally by the collar. When I'm in a room and there's 20 atheists, it doesn't bother me a bit, because I know ultimately they don't have a leg to stand on. They can't get around this very argument. Alan Guth, he gave an interview in which he was trying to explain away this idea. So here's what he does. He shrinks it down to a point, as he says, smaller than a proton. And he blows some smoke. Listen to how he explains it. They asked him, they said, how big was this very early pre-inflation universe? That means how big was everything that came from the Big Bang? He says amazingly small, about 10 to the minus 24 centimeters across. Smaller than a proton. Also amazing, it would contain only about 25 pounds of matter. What's my next question to him?
Where did that come from?
Where did the 25 pounds come from? Because, guys, he didn't explain the existence of the universe. All he did was shrink it down to 25 pounds of matter, which in and of itself is illogical. I mean, think about it for just a minute. Look around your room. As I'm looking at y'all, y'all could lose 25 pounds, and it would be a good thing after the holiday meals. I won't comment on which ones of you. Now, seriously, guys, this is where they are left right here, of saying everything came from something smaller than a proton. Oh, I see John done gone to finger pointing, man. Option number 3 is the only one that is left, the only one that really makes sense. It's a self-evident truth that nothing produces nothing. In view of this, since something now exists, it must follow that something has existed forever, that something responsible for the creation of the universe, that something was God. So let me show you how when I debate or when I talk to atheists, let me show you how I position this argument. I basically put forth all 3 of those points. Here's your only 3 options. It's eternal, it popped into existence from nothing, or it was created. I discount the eternal one because it's unscientific. that now means that an atheist is arguing, they are left with arguing the position that something comes from nothing. And that is a position they don't want to be in, guys. Because all you have to do is smile at them and say, show me any other example in the world of where that's happened. And then you just smile at them and say, doesn't it take a lot more faith to believe that than it does that there's a God?
Gobble, gobble. Dinner time.
All right. Option number 2. Anthropological argument. When you hear the word anthropological, what should you be thinking?
Anthropology?
Not in this context, no.
Morals.
Morals.
Just taking a stab at it.
A stab at it with a police line, that's very good. Actually, this picture was taken just outside of Tiger Woods' house. Just kidding, just kidding. George Gaylord Simpson said, morals arise only in man. Why is that important?
It makes them different than the animal.
Okay?
Separates them from the animal kingdom.
Absolutely. Now, if I'm a naturalist, and I believe that we can explain everything by nature, and I say that everything evolved, I now have to argue what? If we're different from animals, we evolved what?
Morals?
We evolved morals. Do you see that's where they're left? They have to come up with this idea, okay, we know morals exist because we're willing to say certain things are right and wrong. If I'm a naturalist, I believe that I can explain everything by nature. Therefore, morals have to be a product of evolution, according to the naturalist. If you look at that list, what do we all consider those?
Sins. We do.
Okay? Absolutely. They're wrong, correct? They're bad behavior. What makes them right or wrong?
Our worldview and morals.
Okay?
Well,
Let me rephrase the question. As you look at that list, do you think an atheist would view it wrong to kill somebody
Yes.
or to rape their wife?
Yes.
Absolutely. One of the things that I do, and you guys may have heard me say this, when I get into a dialogue with an atheist who really is honestly searching, there are a lot of them who aren't, but if I'm dialoguing with somebody who is, I'll ask them, would you mind if I come to your house, rob you blind, and kill your family? And guess what every single one of them says?
No.
No.
They don't want me doing it. Okay, so that tells you as a educated preacher that even atheists recognize what?
Morals. Laws.
They recognize the idea of right and wrong. Yeah, Dean?
one of the, and obviously I agree with you on that, but there's some
That's good.
there's some instances where an atheist, in order to hold their position, will say that morals are different between you and me. For instance, one of the illustrations they use, they say that they wouldn't stick a needle into a baby, but if the baby was sick, they would take that risk and cause that harm in order to cure the baby. So they would say that morals are objective or subjective based upon the person. So how do we deal with that?
I would ask them, do they recognize certain behaviors as always right and always wrong? The needle thing, that's a red herring. That's a straw man argument. What they're doing is trying to get you off the idea of absolute morals. Because in certain situations, it might seem okay to do the needle, and certain it might not. But is there ever a situation where rape is right or wrong? Right? No. Is there ever a situation where killing or drunk driving or infanticide, in every situation, these behaviors are wrong? They're wrong ethically. They're wrong in the eyes of God. Yeah.
Brad, killing, you mean murder, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, just check. You got policemen, you got
Absolutely.
soldiers who, you know,
Now, this would be premeditated murder.
okay.
So as you look at that list, we all recognize them as wrong. And Dean, if you know, it'd be the same thing if somebody said, I would never cut off anybody's leg.
Gotcha.
And you say, okay, yeah, that's right, we wouldn't cut off anybody's leg. And then they say, oh, but this man's diabetic and he's lost the circulation in his leg and it's going gangrene, so if you don't cut it off, he's going to die. And so they've tried to position you into thinking that, well, it might be right in this sense and it might not be right in here. Cutting off a leg has absolutely nothing to do with what we're looking at up here, which are absolute right and wrongs.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
In order for something to be right or wrong, it demands that there's an absolute standard. That's what they don't want you to get to. Because you say, okay, what is that standard? What is the standard that says lying is wrong? What is the standard that says me not sleeping with my neighbor's wife is wrong? Ultimately, this time we only have two options. That is that morality and ethics originated from God, or they originated from man. Now, if I'm an atheist, how many choices have I got this time?
One.
Just one. What's the problem with that one?
Well, because if man's the only one with morals, then he's different from the animals again.
Okay. But keep thinking your thing through.
Okay, so he's different from the animals. So
He's different from the animals. If we were to, let's stay at Bear Valley. Do you guys have certain principles and dress codes and certain rules and regulations?
Yeah.
So, who gets to set them?
President.
Why?
Because he's the president.
But isn't your opinion just as important as his?
No.
No.
That's the way.
Okay, Denny, they passed that one. You're okay there. Guys, the problem with saying that man evolved morals is that every single person would view what is right and wrong a little bit differently. Here's what I'm getting at. Would things be a little different at Bear Valley if you all got to pick the dress code, if y'all got to pick how long the classes lasted, what you took? You see, what you guys view as being right and wrong, it may be different from somebody else. Now, that's just within Bear Valley. Imagine if we were to invite a Muslim in and ask him to make the rules for Bear Valley. Or if we invited an atheist, or if we invited a woman, or if we... Ultimately, who gets to decide what is right and what is wrong?
Right.
The example I use a lot of times when I'm in a public setting is, imagine in a household full of teens that suddenly the parents tell the teens, okay, for a week you get to make all the rules. Would there be some differences? Absolutely there would. Because the kids may stay up later, they may watch different shows, they may eat junk food all the time. Ultimately, if you are an atheist, you are stuck with fighting the position that ethics came from man, and now you got to figure out how to tell me which man gets to decide and why his view is more important than somebody else's. How many of you in there have actually studied anything about the Nazi Germany? A couple of you? What did Adolf Hitler really think he was doing in all seriousness?
Curing the world.
Thought he was fixing everything. He thought he was creating what he believed to be the perfect race. Now, he was grossly messed up in the head, but in his mind, was he doing what he thought was right?
Yes.
Absolutely. In fact, those of you who've actually studied that era, you know, in the German courts, there came a point where the Jews were not even given they weren't viewed as people. They're basically viewed on the same level as an animal. So they weren't given the same rights. So, you know, ultimately you've got a situation where we all know morals exist. We all know certain behaviors are right or certain behaviors are wrong. Where'd they come from? They either came from God or from man. If you tell me they came from man, now you're stuck fighting the idea that Adolf Hitler was right. Because after all, he's a man, he came up with what he thought was right. Questions, comments?
Don't you think we're kind of headed that way, though, Brad? Because people are just so, like you say, postmodern. They, society anymore. I mean, that's why, 50 million babies aborted. Well, who are you to tell me, that this is right or wrong? Or, how do we know Hitler was wrong? And I think we're kind of headed that way, don't you?
Absolutely. Well, think about this. What happened at the end of the period of Judges? What was everybody doing?
What was right in their own eyes?
They were doing what was right in their own eyes. And if you look around the United States of America today, basically, even though we don't say that, that's what we're doing.
Of course it's good.
We do what is right in our eyes, and we justify it.
Legitimize it and legalize it also.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So back to our argument for a minute. You frame it to where somebody has to admit, yes, there are morals, and they even will admit that there are certain behaviors that are absolutely right, absolutely wrong, which demands a standard. The only option that makes logical sense is that humans have adopted God's standard for right and wrong. That true morality is based on his unchanging nature. I'll give you an example of how we know this. It's kind of a unique study. They did a study of 10 South Pacific islands. These were islands where the people pretty much were still what you and I might call aborigines or very native. They were uncivilized. They went to these 10 different islands, and they basically found out what is the moral code that these tribes are living by. And in all of these tribes, they found behaviors like adultery, killing, cheating, stealing as wrong. But in all these 10 islands, none of them communicated with each other. So what's the point? The point is they had all adopted God's standard. I mean, if we were to say it's man's standard, we would expect all 10 of these different islands to have different things that they viewed as right and wrong. But ultimately, all 10 of them had adopted some of the same standards, some of the same unchanging standards that we got from God. Now, back to Jerry's point. Is our society abandoning some of the morals? Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you look at every nation that has ever grown to power. They all fall from within, and it's because they embrace some of these godless, immoral practices. And that's exactly where we're headed. I read a report about 2 weeks ago. There's a guy who's petitioning the court to make it where personhood is not granted to a child until that child reaches the age of 2 years old.
That's crazy.
Which means up to that period, you could kill him. So, anyway, we could talk about that for a long, long time. This world is, as my wife and I sing, this world is not my home, I'm just passing through.
Amen.
Ultimately, whatever God does, commands, or approves is for our good. One of the things that I hope that you will do in your teaching and preaching is I hope that you will communicate the fact that a command, we always view commands as a negative. And probably that comes from the way the Ten Commandments were given. Thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not do that, thou shalt not do this. But ultimately, we have to remember the commands were for our good. And by that I mean, the reason he's saying don't commit adultery is because it's going to harm your relationship with your marriage. You may have sexually transmitted diseases. There are consequences. And so therefore, that is a good command. It's a good thing. You know, in the church, I think oftentimes everything is so presented so negative that our teenagers, they grow up and they think, man, Christianity is just this repressive, horrible belief system that won't let you do anything. They don't realize that God has put all this before us because ultimately it's for our good. It's going to make us live better and happier lives in the end. Comments, questions on that one? All right. Number 3. Teleological argument. Anytime you see the word teleo, we're talking about design. There are 2 areas of design that most apologists will immediately go to. So if I'm going to teach a lesson on intelligent design, I'm going to teach on something like the universe, design in the universe, or design in the human body. It fascinates me when I get into conversations with, for instance, neurosurgeons who get to see firsthand the design of the nervous system. They admit all day long that there's all kinds of complexity in design there, but as soon as you try to bring a God into it, it's like, no, we can't have any of that. So, what do? If I'm going to prove there's a God, I just set up an argument. Design demands a designer. And we start looking at things like, okay, what about the position of the earth? Does that show design?
Oh, yeah.
How would that show design? Let me ask it that way.
Well, one thing you could show is there any other planet in the universe that's located where we're at and has the ability to support life the way that we do?
Okay. How about if we start looking at some of those factors? Oh, let me back up. So you've got a ball in space. Not only do we have to discuss the fact that ball exists. Okay, matter exists. Now we got to talk about, do we see design in getting that ball to a place that can sustain life? Because if I'm a naturalist, if I'm an evolutionist, what do I say is the result of how the ball got here?
Coincidence?
Chance, coincidence, Big Bang explosion. So we start looking, and guys, I don't expect you to memorize all this. This is not You know, one of the things you'll learn about me is I want you to get the big picture. I don't expect you to memorize like all these little points, but I'm doing this more just to kind of show you how you might set up an argument. So you basically go through and you say, all right, what are the statistical odds of getting a heavenly body in the right place? Like in the right type of galaxy, the right location within that galaxy. And you know, I just showed you all a spiral galaxy. The Earth is in a spiral galaxy, but it's got to be in just the right spot of that galaxy. It can't be too far out on one of those arms, and it can't be too close to the center. It's got to be near the right age sun, one that's not flaring up or flaring down. It's got to be the right distance from that sun. The Earth has to have the right rotation rate to allow for all 4 seasons, springtime and harvest. It's got to have the right tilt on it. You add all of those stuff up, and the number you see there at the bottom, that's the statistical odds of getting a heavenly body in just the right place in space. Now, as you look at all of those zeros, ask yourself, do we have life yet? The answer is no. We still got to add some stuff like, what about water? Can you get life without water?
No.
Okay, so guys, think about this. You got to have a heavenly body, statistically speaking, in the right place. There's your odds of getting a body in the right place. But then you also got to have enough water on it to maintain a water cycle. Not only that, you talk about our sun. You think it's just chance that a heat source like that is able to continue burning without completely burning up? I mean, I'm looking at a class where some of y'all been around for 45, some of you been around for 50 years or more. I won't even talk about John. But you think about the fact the sun is giving off energy, but it's not going away. You know, if you throw a log in the fire, what happens to the log?
Burns up.
Burns up. Gives off heat, burns up. Guys, the sun is just the right distance, made up of just the right components, that it's able to heat the earth at just the right temperature without boiling the water, and yet it doesn't burn up. Check this out. I love this. This is from Science Digest. I copied it just because I think to me, it shows design. It says the Earth moves in its orbit around the sun, departing from a straight line by only 1/9 of an inch. 1/9 of an inch every 18 miles. If we departed by 1/8 of an inch, we'd come so close to the sun that we'd be incinerated. If we departed by 1/10 of an inch, we'd find ourselves so far from the sun that we would all freeze to death. Now, can you imagine in our orbit, we're cutting a straight line every 18 miles, and we don't depart more than 1/9 of an inch. That's phenomenal. I mean, you can't pave a road 18 miles without departing more than 1/9 of an inch. And yet, our Earth does it. There's a couple of things that we don't know. I say we. Scientists don't know the root cause of it that show design. Things like, for instance, the orbit of the Earth. Is it perfectly round or is it elliptical?
Isn't it elliptical?
It's elliptical. Basically like an egg. That means that there are times where the Earth actually has to speed up to avoid being taken out into space, and times it actually has to slow down so that it's not pulled in. So like, for instance, in January, when the Earth is closest to the sun, it actually has to slow down. When it's July, it actually has to speed up to avoid being basically drifted out of the orbit. How does the Earth know to speed up or slow down? What about the moon? You guys probably don't think a whole lot about it on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to read this just because I think it's, to me, it really, really does hammer home the point of design. The Earth is poised some 247,000 miles away from the moon. This too happens to be just right. The moon helps control the tides. If the moon were just a little bit closer, the tides would be so enormous that twice a day the tides would reach 35 to 50 feet high over most of the Earth's surface. If the moon were just a little bit further away, the tides would stop, the oceans would become stagnant. The plant and the animal life in the sea are dependent on those daily tides to sustain life. In fact, we get approximately 90% of our oxygen from microscopic plants in the sea that are dependent on those tides. If you move the moon just a little further away, the tides stop, and suddenly we don't have enough oxygen. And yet here's the point, guys. Our kids, our grandkids, the people who are sitting in your congregation, they're learning the moon just got there literally by chance. That it just is a result of a Big Bang explosion. Now, Dean, when you are chatting with somebody, let's say you're chatting in a chat room. If you throw something like this out there, they're going to refute one or two of these. But if you start playing the pile-on game, where you hit them with 5, 6, 8, 10 of these, eventually one or two things is going to happen. They're either going to have to realize, okay, this is too much to have just occurred, or they're going to have to show their hand and show you, I'm not willing to actually look at the evidence with an unbiased eye. I've made up my mind, I'm pre-committed to atheism, and no matter if Jesus Christ himself came down, I'm not changing. But the point is, you start unloading these kinds of proofs, one after the other, just bam, bam, bam. Because I'm not done yet. We still got stuff like, what about the atmosphere? And you start realizing, good night, this thing couldn't have happened by chance. That's how you load an argument so that somebody goes, aha, I get it. Okay. What does the atmosphere do for us? Scatters light waves, captures solar heat, protects the Earth from meteors, helps make radio communication possible. You know, it's funny. Nobody in that room, in that classroom, ever thinks about meteors striking you in the head, going all the way through your body. No. Because we know they burn up in the atmosphere. When those little bitty pieces of space dust or rocks hit our atmosphere, they burn up. Just imagine for a moment, if by chance we had a heavenly body in the right place, and if by chance we had water covering, and if by chance the moon was right where it needed to be, but we didn't have an atmosphere, you and I would constantly be worried about space dust. Because the minute one hits you, you're gone. Because it literally would just pass right on through you. So you're walking around with like a Kevlar umbrella all the time. So, there's an argument for the existence of God. The very positioning of the earth itself. So not only do we have to explain the existence of it, how did matter get here? Is it eternal? Did it pop into existence from nothing? Or was it created by something superior to it? Okay. Now, not only do we explain its very existence, we got to explain the fact that, hey, the earth is in a very particular niche to sustain life. All of this stuff cannot simply be a product of evolution. And again, I come back to the phrase, it takes a lot more faith to believe that there is no God than to accept the fact that all of those things are the product of the designer. I would strongly encourage you guys to think about doing something just for fun. Print out a copy of Stonehenge. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Print out a color copy of Stonehenge, stick it in your Bible, and anytime you meet somebody who claims, I don't believe in a God or I don't believe in creation, whatever, drop it on the table and just ask them, could that have happened by naturalistic causes? Could the shifting of tectonic plates or volcanoes or could earthquakes have arranged those rocks the way we find them today? What is every single person going to say to you?
No.
Absolutely not. Now think with me for a moment, guys. You drop on the table 18 rocks that are basically stacked in different order. And then you drop right behind it a color picture of a cell, a living cell. Which one of those is more complex?
Cell.
By a factor of 10 trillion. I mean, you think about all the organelles in a cell. You think about the fact that that thing is able to make energy. It's got a DNA code. It's got all of these proteins. It's got a bilipid membrane. And yet, they're going to tell you Stonehenge was created. A cell just happened. That's how you kind of set up the argument. Michael Murray said this. He said, almost everything about the basic structure of the universe, for example, the fundamental laws, the parameters of physics, the initial distribution of matter and energy is balanced on a razor's edge for life to occur. So let's stop for just a second. Somebody tell me why just this very week there was a headline talking about the possibility of Mars having life. Why is that a big deal?
Because they're trying to prove that Earth is not unique in the universe, that there are other planets that sustain life. Therefore, if there are other planets that sustain life, Earth isn't unique, and that could possibly disprove creation.
Absolutely. Guys, I've got some really dear friends who are NASA scientists. They're Christians, but they recognize the fact that branches of their particular organization are basically, when you really boil it down, out to prove that there is no God. The reason that we're slamming projectiles into the moon is to see if we can find water so that we can claim there's life up there. The reason we sent rovers to Mars was to try to identify life, to ultimately disprove the creation account in the Bible and God. Here's a fun quote. This is a Catholic priest, so that right there ought to kind of tell you enough. George Cohn, he said, the intelligent design movement belittles God. It makes God a designer, an engineer. The God of religious faith is a God of love. He did not design me.
That guy's an idiot.
Hold it. What's wrong with him? Oh, boy. I didn't know the Catholic Church was like that.
Dude, Catholics have completely given in to evolution.
Didn't know it. Wow.
Oh, yeah. 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 He actually said this at the American Advancement for the American Association for the Advancement of Science meeting in 2006. Basically, he has become a pawn for the evolutionists to be able to say, look, guys, you can be religious and believe our theory. So when you think about that, how about the human body? Do we see any design there?
Big time.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm going to back out for just a minute. Let me pull up another PowerPoint just to show you something. Questions or comments while I'm searching here?
Are we going to have access to your PowerPoint?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yep.
Brad, what do you make of that whole thing that's happening on Mars? Apparently they said they found fossilized bacteria. Does that prove anything?
No, other than we probably unleash bacteria on Mars from one of our missions. I mean, think about it. How would you disprove that we introduced that from one of our rovers, one of our probes, one of our satellites? See what I'm saying?
Yep.
In order for it to be a big deal to me, it would have to be a bacteria we've never found, never seen before, and there would have to be a whole lot of it. Because if you find a single fossilized bacterium, it's telling me that more than likely 20 years ago when we sent probes to Mars, we were stupid and didn't realize that our probes would have human fingerprints and stuff on them, and when they landed, lo and behold, guess what you've just introduced to Mars? Let me see if I can find... Go ahead.
Could something like that survive outside, like in space?
Bacteria?
Yeah.
Some of them can. Some of them are capsulated. And the reason we know that is because they have taken some up to the moon. Okay. They've actually basically recollected them from man up there. So you got to remember, they're on a projectile getting outside of our atmosphere. It would be coming back that they would burn up. So if they're inside of something, and let's be honest, have you ever seen a rocket built in a sterile environment? The answer is no, you can't. You can't put together an airplane in a sterile environment. So you've automatically introduced all kinds of contamination and stuff. I'm opening up, I think this is it. This is a cover. I'm just going to show you about 4 slides out of here just for fun. I did this at Miller Street, so some of you have seen this. This was a cover of Discover magazine, March 2006, and that collage of Darwin's face is made up of virus particles. They go on to say that all living things came from viruses. Yeah, exactly. It says, it seems we owe our existence to viruses, the least of the semi-living forms. About the only thing they have in common with any sort of theological prime mover is their omnipresence and their invisibility.
Omnipresence.
So, in a way, guys, it's like they're taking a little stab at religious people. Then they go on to say, now there's news for their intelligent designers and the rest of us to ponder. Humans, all life on Earth, may well have evolved from the most unintelligent entities one can imagine. Genetic shards that do nothing but copy themselves. We're nobody's great idea. We're fortunate mistakes of countless biochemical morons. That's evolution. It's humbling but somehow comforting. The reason I'm showing you guys this, not because it's idiotic, which it is, but to show you how far they're willing to go and how little they actually think about what they're doing. Anybody that's ever had a virus, whether it's a cold or the flu, what do we know about viruses? What do they have to have?
A host.
They got to have a host. If you read the Stedman's medical definition for virus, it says, unlike bacteria, they are incapable of growth or reproduction apart from living cells. And yet, what are they saying that everything evolved from? Viruses. You see the problem, guys? Their whole argument collapses because you can't have a virus without a host. You can't have a virus without a living cell to live in, and yet they're trying to say we may owe our existence to viruses. I show you that just to show the fact that these guys, I don't want to be ugly, but they're idiots. All right. Designing the human body. Richard Dawkins has got a brand new book out called The Greatest Show on Earth. And he actually surprised me in his book. He actually has gone back to the old method of saying everything was a step-by-step, slow evolutionary process. there are two forms, or two ideas, two theories of how everything evolved. You guys do need to at least be aware of this. The old-fashioned Darwinian form is that over millions and millions and millions of years, things mutated, changed, slow little gradual tweaks. That was kind of the standard forever. Then we looked at the fossil record and we said, wait a second, there's too many things that are fully formed when they come on the fossil scene. That's why they call it the Cambrian explosion. There's an explosion of fully formed fossils. And they couldn't explain that through this step-by-step slow process, so they came up with a theory called punctuated equilibrium, which basically says, okay, for millions of years, there may not be really anything. And then all of a sudden, evolution gets on steroids, and you've got these massive vomits of all kinds of new species. And then it flattens out again, and everything's cool for a while. And then we go on steroids again, and everything evolves. And then so it's this punctuated equilibrium. Well, that was kind of what everybody was leaning towards for the last 15 years. Dawkins has kind of gone back and said, no, realistically, we know that idea is no good. He's gone back to Darwin's slow process. Thinking about that, which one came first? Nerves or organs? What would you say, Jerry?
Oh, give me a coin. I don't know.
What do you think, James?
I think nerves.
Nerves?
Sure.
I'm sorry, but uneducated.
What good is a nerve without an organ to innervate?
Well, it's no good.
Secondly, what good is an organ if you don't have the nerve to innervate it?
Right.
Like right now, you guys are digesting whatever you had for lunch without any input from you. Because you have involuntary nerves that are taking care of that for you, right?
Yeah, sure.
So think about it. If you don't have the nerves there, your whole digestive system is worthless, literally. It's just a tube. And what you pour in is what comes out. You got to have the nerves there, but you're not going to have nerves without the organs around. I tell people this, and it's very, very true. If there was a single nerve, let's say, you cooked up some primordial soup and zapped it with electricity, and you got a nerve cell. If you don't have a brain and a spinal cord to process it, it's basically like having the mouse of your computer without the computer. It's no good. Furthermore, we know that it takes a cell to make a cell. So where did the original cells come from? As you're thinking about this, I'm laying out an argument for a designer. I'm laying out an argument that, yes, there has to be a God, because think about it. Here's what they've done in textbooks. All of you guys are over the age of 20?
Yeah.
Eric, are you the young? Dean, which one of y'all is the youngest?
What's your birthday? March 9th. I think I'm the youngest.
How old are you, 23?
22.
22. Ah, mere children. All right. Even when you guys were infants, they still had in textbooks a law of science called the law of biogenesis. It is still a law today. You don't get to be a law unless you don't change. The law of biogenesis simply says life comes only from other life. Now think about what that means for evolution. Life comes only from other life. What they have done since you guys have now grown into your 20s is they've replaced that. They've actually stripped the law of biogenesis out of textbooks, and they've now put the theory of abiogenesis It's spelled Abiogensis. And that is a theory that maybe life could have started through these small fragments of material. So we've taken out of textbooks a known scientific law that says life comes only from other life, and we've thrown in a theory that supports the idea of evolution. It's garbage.
Scholarly.
Yes, very scholarly. Somebody explain to me, what is irreducible complexity? Dean?
It basically states that there's structures in the cell that are like a mousetrap, that if you take one piece out of it, then it can't work.
Okay. And why is that a big deal?
Because if you have something that's irreducibly complex, and evolution says that things happen over a step-by-step period, then you have to explain each of those pieces through evolution. But the problem with that is that you need all those pieces in order for the thing to work.
Absolutely. On the screen, you've got a picture of a flagellum, and those are all the proteins that are needed in order for that thing to turn. Michael Behe's point is, if any of those proteins are missing, that thing doesn't turn. So why in the world would something go to all the trouble of evolving this elaborate outboard motor when it doesn't function? You got to have everything in place. Now, I want to communicate something just to make sure you guys don't ever fall into the trap of what a lot of people are doing. Do all intelligent designers believe in creation?
No.
No. In fact, Michael Behe still believes in some facets of evolution. The original guys who came up with the idea of intelligent design movement were evolutionists. So just because you hear somebody talking about intelligent design, don't kid yourself and lump them into a creation Christian label. A lot of these guys still buy into, okay, there had to be a God to get things started, but once he got it started, it evolved to where it is today. Questions, comments? All right, keep rolling. Paul Davies, Adam Phillips said, some scientists say just throw energy at it and it'll happen spontaneously. It's a little bit like saying put a stick of dynamite under a pile of bricks and bang, you've got a house. Of course, you won't have a house. You'll just have a mess. How many of us want to drink hydrochloric acid? I don't think anybody. Why do I ask that question?
So what's in our stomach?
That's what's in our stomach. Now get this. We store hydrochloric acid in glass in the lab because it eats through all the other containers. If you drank it out of that bottle, it would eat through the lining of your esophagus, probably end up killing you. And yet you have hydrochloric acid in your stomach to break down foods. Which begs the question, which one did you produce first? Did you evolve hydrochloric acid producing cells or a stomach container to keep it in that's able to shed its lining every 3 to 5 days? And somebody says, well, obviously, you got to have a container to keep hydrochloric acid in. Guys, why in the world would you evolve an elaborate container if you didn't need it? You see, the more you really dig into this stuff, the more you realize all of your body systems had to be in place, fully functional. It's not a question of did organs or nerves come first. You got to have both of them present at the same time. In fact, as you look at that picture of the human body on the screen, think about what all you need in your body in order to digest food. You got to have bile from the gallbladder. You got to have pancreatic enzymes. You got to have stomach acid. You got to have intestinal enzymes. Plus, you've got to have a circulatory system to deliver the food. You got to have all of those different systems in your body working just to get food broken down and spread out to your body. The point being, how in the world are we to explain a step-by-step, okay, well, maybe on his millionth year he evolved a liver, and then a million years later he evolved a pancreas, and a million years later he evolved intestine. Dude, nobody would live long enough because you couldn't break down food. You've got to have all of that. This one I love. I always ask the audience, which one came first, your heart or your lungs? Without fail, everybody looks at that and says, well, you got to have a heart. Ask somebody that's had a heart attack how good your heart muscle is if it doesn't get oxygenated blood. You got a left and a right coronary artery that supply oxygenated blood to that heart muscle. If you don't have oxygenated blood, that heart tissue is going to die. So you look at it and you say, okay, well, then you had to have the lungs. You had to have a way of pulling oxygen out of the air and getting it into your bloodstream. Well, that sounds good, but if you don't have a heart pump to pump the blood to and from the lungs, it does you no good. That makes sense? Guys, I'm not trying to get like in depth as far as I don't want to take you deep into anatomy. We can get really, really deep really quick if you want to, but I'm wanting to point out the fact that yes, we can use these things to argue against chance and for the idea of design. Yeah, Dean?
So, I understand the part about if you have the heart first and you don't have the oxygenated blood, but if you have the lungs first and you don't have the heart, then what did you say?
If you've got your lungs there, how do you get blood pumped to your lungs to receive oxygen? Does that make sense? If you don't have a pump to carry the blood to and from your lungs so that you can get rid of the old gas and bring in new oxygen, your lungs don't do you any good at all. Because think about what the lungs actually are doing. Let me see if I've got a picture of it. No, I don't. Okay, we'll back up. Your lungs are actually taking a gas, that is oxygen, and mixing it into your bloodstream. And then that is then pumped throughout your body. If you don't have a method of getting the oxygen into your bloodstream and then circulated through your body, the only tissue of your body that would be oxygenated is your lungs. And everything else would die. You got to be able to circulate that.
All right.
What about that? Do we see design in the ear? Absolutely. Do we see design in the eye? Absolutely. It blows my mind that we are still, to this day, we are still mimicking optical equipment, video equipment after the human eye, and yet we'd say that a video camera is created or designed, the human eye is not. Yeah.
What about the argument that the eye is sloppily designed?
That there's a blind spot?
Yep.
Yeah. I love it when somebody brings that up simply because they don't know what the blind spot does. For the rest of the class, what Dean's talking about, if you go into some of the forums or if you debate with an atheist, they'll say, the eye doesn't show good design because after all, there's this blind spot in the back of it where you can't receive light input. What they don't realize is that blind spot, that's where the optic nerve is coming into the back of your eye. That's where the nerves that actually are receiving everything hit your eyeball and then split up to all the rods and cones. If you didn't have that blind spot, you wouldn't have a way to take that signal and transmit it electronically to your brain. And you ask the question, okay, is it a poor design? Can I see in 3 dimensions, full color range, even in low levels of light, with what I've got? Absolutely. So why is that a bad design? You know, it's funny when you work with a camera, you think about how many setting changes you have to make going from a lit room to a dark outside or to a bright room. You know, the camera, it's got to change the aperture, it's got to change whether or not it's going to take a quick photo or whether the exposure is going to be long. Your eye is doing it instantly. Your eye is looking through an inferior camera. Your eye's already done it. Your eye is being able to take the picture visually and see things that the camera's having to make adjustments to. And yet your eye is able to do it. Comments, thoughts? All right. What's that? That's a cell. You guys didn't know y'all were going to get a full science class today, did you? I promise it won't be this way every day. I show you that just to kind of press home the whole idea of design. I did a lesson, I think I did it there at Bear Valley 2 years ago, where I go out into space and then I come back from the outer reaches of our universe and then come back, and every time I show a slide, it's a little bit closer. So you can see stars, you can see nebula, then you can see our galaxy, then you can see our sun, then you can finally see some of the bigger planets, and you can see the Earth, and you can see the Earth and the Moon, then you can see some of the land continents, and I keep zooming down. And so it's, basically, then we get to land masses, we get to distinct animals and plants, we get to distinct systems of those animals and plants, and I go all the way down to cells and into DNA. Making the case for, number one, the fact that in the grand scheme of things, we are a very small speck in the universe, and yet we are God's pinnacle of creation, and number two, to make us realize just how complex things really are. This is a quote from a guy named Francis Crick. Watson and Crick were the 2 men who discovered the molecular structure of DNA. He says, biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather it evolved. In other words, we got to keep telling ourselves and reminding ourselves that that's not designed because it sure looks like it. And that's a sad way to live your lives, guys. All right. In your books, you should, by next class, have gotten through, I'm telling you this now just so you guys can kind of stay up. You should have gotten through page 58. It reads quick. We've already covered a large proportion of that. What we're going to do when we come back next time is we're going to look at what I call 7 easy proofs of how we prove there's a God. And I may be an atheist for a little bit and let you guys try to convince me that yes, there is a God.
Sweet.
Hey, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I more than likely will be gone Thursday because Adam, our son, has a surgery on Thursday.
Okay.
Could I do just read up to the next few chapters even after that?
Yeah, go ahead and cover through 58 for sure. And then the next time we get together after that, we're going to be looking at evil, pain, and suffering, which is chapter 4 in the book. So you may want to go ahead. Obviously, we're going to record this like we're doing right now, and you can You can take a look at it at your convenience.
Okay,
So,
thanks.
guys, I'm looking forward to this class. I hope we all learn a lot. I hope that you're challenged some, and I hope that you're going to learn some stuff that you can use that will greatly, greatly, greatly benefit the way that you evangelize and teach other people. So, study hard. Have a great week. I'll see you Thursday.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Brad.
All right.